I was gone for only 3 days. Just 3. And yet when I came back, my world no longer felt like mine. I had just returned from a mandatory training program for nurses in Philadelphia. 3 days of cold conference rooms, bitter coffee, and hotel sheets that smelled like bleach. The drive back to New Jersey was long, but all I thought about was home. I craved the comfort of my own bed, the warmth of my daughter's hug, and the quiet routine of my little family. As I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as always. Our modest 2-story home with a small porch and a swing that Emily loved to sit on. The golden light of the evening spilled across the lawn, and for a moment I felt relief. I thought everything would be exactly as I left it. Dragging my suitcase behind me, I unlocked the front door. The house was unusually quiet. Usually, I would hear the television in the living room or the clatter of dishes in the kitchen. This silence felt heavy, like a warning. "Hello, I'm home," I called out, expecting Emily to come running. But only my voice echoed back. I set my coffee on the entry table and rolled my suitcase down the hallway toward my bedroom. My body ached for rest. I imagined sinking into my mattress, hugging my pillow, and letting exhaustion melt away. I even pictured the way Emily would climb into bed beside me to show me her latest drawing. But when I pushed open the door, the sight before me made my blood run cold. Sandra, my mother-in-law, was sprawled across my bed as though it belonged to her. Her shoes were neatly placed under the nightstand, her silk robe hung in my closet, and her handbag sat proudly on the dresser where I usually kept my wedding ring at night. I froze, my hand still gripping the handle of my suitcase. My chest tightened, my throat closed, and the suitcase slipped from my fingers, hitting the hardwood floor with a sharp thud. Sandra didn't flinch. She looked up from her phone, tilted her head slightly, and said, "Oh, you're back. I moved in here while you were away. This room suits me better." Her words sliced through me like glass. My eyes darted around the room. My belongings were missing. I stepped back into the hallway and saw boxes stacked against the wall. My books, my clothes, even the framed wedding photo Michael and I took on the beach in Florida. My pillow was tossed on top of the pile like old junk waiting for trash day. I whispered, my voice barely audible, "Why are my things out here?" Sandra smoothed the comforter with her manicured hand and replied as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world. Michael and I agreed. "You can take the downstairs room. This space is just better for me." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My husband, Michael, had agreed to this? The man who once promised to protect me, to build a life with me, had stood by and let his mother claim my space? Anger surged through me, hot and sharp, but exhaustion weighed me down. I had no strength left to fight. I forced my lips into a tight smile and nodded slightly, though my chest burned. On the outside, I looked calm. Inside, I was screaming. I turned and dragged my suitcase back down the hall, each wheel bumping loudly against the floor. My reflection in the hallway mirror startled me. My face pale, my eyes wide, my body trembling like I had just seen a ghost. When I entered the living room, Emily was there. She sat on the rug, cross-legged, coloring a dolphin in her sketchbook. My sweet 8-year-old looked up, her eyes lighting up when she saw me. I placed the stuffed dolphin I had bought for her on the couch. She squealed with delight, hugged it tightly, and went back to coloring without a care in the world. Michael was sitting on the sofa beside her, flipping channels on the TV. He looked up briefly, smiled at me, then turned his eyes back to the screen as though nothing unusual had happened, as though boxes in the hallway and his mother in our bedroom were perfectly normal. Did he really agree to this? The question gnawed at me, and the lack of acknowledgement in his eyes hurt more than Sandra's words. Betrayal stung my chest, but worse than that was the dismissal, like my feelings didn't even matter. I kissed Emily's head softly, inhaling the scent of her shampoo, then excused myself to the guest bathroom. I locked the door, leaned against it, and let the silence press down on me. My reflection in the mirror looked unfamiliar. My face was drained of color, my eyes glassy, my lips pressed into a tight line. I barely recognized myself. I gripped the edges of the sink, knuckles white, and forced myself to breathe. In through my nose, out through my mouth, over and over until my chest loosened. My body wanted to collapse, but my mind began to sharpen. This wasn't just about a bedroom. It wasn't even about space. This was about control. Sandra had been testing me for years, little jabs at dinner about how I didn't cook the family way, her habit of dressing Emily for school without asking me, the way she would rearrange my kitchen cabinets, claiming it made more sense her way. Small invasions, each one subtle enough to brush off, but together they formed a pattern, and now she had crossed the final line. My sanctuary, our bedroom, was no longer mine. I stared at my reflection and saw something different this time. Not just wariness, not just defeat. I saw fire. Quiet, controlled, but burning. I didn't storm back into that room. I didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, I made a decision. I would wait. I would watch. I would gather my strength. Because if Sandra thought she had won, she was mistaken. If Michael thought I would simply bow my head and accept this, he was wrong. I rinsed my face with cold water, straightened my shoulders, and stepped back into the hallway. On the outside, I wore a calm smile. Inside, I was already planning my next move. I didn't know how far this would go. I didn't know how much I would have to lose before I reclaimed my space. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty: this was only the beginning. The night after I came home, I lay awake in the cramped guest room downstairs, staring at the ceiling. The mattress creaked every time I shifted, and the air smelled faintly of dust, like a room that hadn't been touched in months. My suitcase sat unopened in the corner because I couldn't bring myself to unpack. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sandra lying on my bed, her robe hanging in my closet, her smug calmness as she told me, "This room suits me better." I thought about how I had imagined this moment while driving back from Philadelphia. I pictured stepping into my bedroom, kicking off my shoes, and sinking into familiar sheets. I thought I'd wrap my arms around Michael and let him carry some of the weight I'd been holding alone. I thought Emily would crawl into bed with us, clutching her new stuffed dolphin, and we'd fall asleep in a pile of warmth and love. That was my expectation. The reality was colder than I ever imagined. My things stacked in boxes like trash. My husband pretending nothing was wrong. My daughter blissfully unaware that her mother had been pushed out of her own place. The next morning, I tried to tell myself it was temporary. Maybe Sandra was just visiting for a while. Maybe this was some twisted miscommunication. But when I walked into the kitchen, the truth hit harder. Sandra was already there, humming as she poured herself coffee into my favorite mug, the one Michael bought me for Mother's Day. She didn't ask. She didn't even look at me. She just moved around my kitchen like she owned it. "Morning," she said flatly, sliding the sugar container across the counter. "You should pick up some more groceries. This brand of creamer isn't my favorite." I gripped the fridge handle so tightly it hurt. My knuckles turned white, but I forced a polite smile. "I'll make a list," I said, even though I wanted to scream. Michael shuffled in a moment later, hair still messy from sleep. He kissed Sandra on the cheek, then kissed the top of Emily's head as she sat at the table. But when his eyes met mine, he looked away, like he was avoiding something, like he knew exactly how wrong this was, but didn't have the courage to admit it. Sandra cleared her throat. "I'll need Emily ready early tomorrow," she said casually. "Her school picture day is coming, and I want to take her shopping for a new dress." I nearly dropped the carton of eggs in my hand. Shopping for a dress? Without asking me? Without even acknowledging that I, her mother, might want to be involved? I swallowed hard, biting down the words burning my tongue. Instead, I leaned down to kiss Emily's cheek and whispered, "We'll talk about it later, sweetheart." She smiled at me, oblivious to the tension thickening the room. All day, the contrast between what I had expected and what I was living gnawed at me. I had always believed family life would be about support, about love, about sharing responsibilities. I believed my marriage was a partnership, that Michael would stand by me, defend me if anyone disrespected me. I believed that my home was mine, a sanctuary I could count on. But reality was a stranger in my house. Reality was Sandra moving through every room as if it were hers. Reality was Michael's silence. Reality was me, biting my tongue, trying not to explode in front of Emily. That night, I sat alone in the guest room with the door locked, scrolling through photos on my phone. There was one of Emily and me on the beach last summer, sand stuck to our legs, both of us laughing with the ocean behind us. I stared at it until tears blurred the screen. I had always promised myself she would grow up knowing her mother was strong, that no one could erase her place in the family. And here I was, erased. But in that moment, I made a promise to myself. I wasn't going to let Sandra win. I wasn't going to let Michael's silence bury me. I wasn't going to let Emily grow up thinking her mother had no voice. I closed my phone, wiped my tears, and sat up straighter. Yes, Sandra had my bedroom. Yes, she had the upper hand for now. But I still had something she couldn't touch, my resolve. The expectation of peace had been shattered. The reality was war, subtle and quiet, but war nonetheless. And I knew I had to choose my next move carefully. Sandra wanted me rattled, reactive, humiliated. She wanted me to explode so she could point her finger and say, "See, she doesn't belong here." But I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. I would wait. I would observe. I would gather every ounce of strength I had. And when the time came, I would remind everyone, Michael, Sandra, and even myself, that this was still my home, my family, my life. I lay back on the stiff mattress, staring at the ceiling once again, but this time my heart wasn't just aching. It was preparing. This wasn't over. Growing up, I never imagined marriage would mean fighting for a place in my own home. I thought love was enough, that when Michael and I said our vows, the world would soften around us. But the truth is, the moment I married him, I also married his mother, though not by choice. Sandra had always been polite in public, generous even. At our wedding, she gave a glowing toast, calling me the daughter she never had. I remember clutching Michael's hand that night, grateful, believing I was stepping into a family that would embrace me. But it didn't take long for the mask to slip. It started small, so small, I almost convinced myself I imagined it. At our first Thanksgiving together, she took the mashed potatoes I had made off the table and replaced them with her own. "Just tradition," she said sweetly, but the smirk in her eyes told another story. At Christmas, she insisted Emily, just 2 years old at the time, wear the dress she had bought instead of the one I picked out. "It's what looks good for family photos," she declared, snapping at Michael when he hesitated. Michael always brushed it off. "She means well," he would say, wrapping an arm around my shoulder. "She's just particular." But the word particular didn't capture the way Sandra looked at me, like I was an intruder who'd stolen her son and dared to claim space in her world. When Emily was born, the tension only grew. Sandra inserted herself into every decision: bottles versus breastfeeding, pediatricians versus family remedies, public daycare versus her watchful care. No matter what I chose, it was wrong in her eyes. She'd whisper little comments to Michael when she thought I couldn't hear. "She's too young to know how to raise a child properly. Don't you think you should step in?" The worst part wasn't her words. It was Michael's silence. He rarely defended me. He wanted peace, and for him, peace meant giving Sandra what she wanted. For years, I told myself it was temporary, that as Emily grew older, things would settle. But Sandra never loosened her grip. By the time Emily started school, Sandra had her hooks in deep. She insisted on picking her up some afternoons, bringing her home with snacks and little lectures about how grandma's way is best. Emily adored her grandmother, of course. And how could I fight that? Sandra wasn't cruel to Emily. On the contrary, she showered her with affection and gifts. But every gift came with a price. Every smile was a claim, every hug a reminder that she was always there, hovering, waiting for me to slip. I remember one particular night, about a year ago. Michael and I had been arguing in the kitchen about whether Emily should join the soccer team. I wanted her to try it. She had begged me for weeks. Michael wasn't sure, worried about the time commitment. And then Sandra appeared in the doorway, arms folded, voice sharp. "She doesn't need soccer. It's too rough. You should listen to your mother, Michael." The words hung heavy in the air. My husband didn't say a thing. I stood there, staring at both of them, realizing how easily my opinion could be erased. That was the night I understood Sandra didn't just want influence. She wanted control. So when I returned from Philadelphia and found her in my bedroom, I knew it wasn't sudden. It was the culmination of years. Each small victory had led her to this boldness. And Michael had let it happen, one quiet nod at a time. But Emily, she was my anchor. Every time Sandra tried to erase me, I thought of Emily's laugh, her trust, her tiny hands in mine. I couldn't abandon her to Sandra's version of family. That thought lit a fire in me stronger than any insult could extinguish. Still, I couldn't strike openly. Not yet. Sandra was cunning. If I lashed out, she'd twist it, painting me as unstable, the ungrateful wife. I could almost hear her voice. I tried to help, but she pushed me away. Poor Michael, dealing with such a difficult wife. No, I had to be smarter. So in the days following, I played the part. I smiled at dinners, offered polite responses, even thanked Sandra for helping with Emily. But inside I was watching, cataloging every move, every word, every way she inserted herself into our lives. And the more I watched, the clearer the pattern became. She didn't just want a say in our home, she wanted ownership. She wanted Michael's loyalty completely, Emily's affection unconditionally, and my presence erased entirely. But I wasn't going to let her win. In the quiet of the guest room at night, I began to map out my next steps. I thought about the places where Sandra overstepped, the cracks in her facade, the moments Michael looked uneasy but stayed silent. I thought about how to shift the balance without exploding, how to let Sandra trap herself with her own arrogance, because one day soon I would act. And when I did, it wouldn't be with shouting or slammed doors. It would be calm, precise, a move she wouldn't see coming until it was too late. For now, though, I waited. I played my role, careful and patient, knowing every day brought me closer to the moment Sandra would realize she had underestimated me, and that moment would change everything. The shift began subtly, like storm clouds gathering before anyone realizes rain is coming. Sandra had taken my bedroom, my kitchen routines, even small parenting choices, but she wasn't satisfied. Power is addictive, and now that she had tasted it, she wanted more. One evening, I came home from a late shift at the hospital. The air smelled like Sandra's heavy perfume the moment I opened the door. Emily was curled on the couch, her hair brushed into tight curls that I hadn't done, wearing a frilly dress I hadn't bought. Sandra sat beside her, flipping through a magazine, while Michael watched a basketball game, oblivious. "Emily looks lovely tonight," Sandra said without looking up. "We practiced her introduction for the school talent show. I signed her up to sing." My chest tightened. Emily loved drawing, not performing on stage. She hated crowds, hated attention like that. I crouched beside her and asked softly, "Sweetheart, did you want to sing in front of everyone?" Emily's little shoulders slumped. She shook her head but whispered, "Grandma said I'd disappoint people if I didn't." I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted iron. I wanted to scream, to rip up the sign-up sheet, but Sandra's eyes flicked toward me, daring me to react. Michael, as usual, said nothing. He just shifted uncomfortably, glued to the television. Later that night, when Emily was asleep, I tried to talk to him. "Michael, this isn't okay. She's forcing Emily into things she doesn't want." He rubbed his forehead, weary. "She's helping, that's all. She means well. Don't make this into a fight." Those words sliced through me. Don't make this into a fight. As if I were the problem, not the woman slowly rewriting the rules of our home. The days blurred together, each one layering more tension onto the last. Sandra began making decisions without asking me. Rearranging Emily's bedtime routine, inviting relatives over without notice, even moving some of my clothes into the laundry room as if they didn't belong upstairs. I played the polite daughter-in-law in front of her, but inside I kept score. Then came the dinner that changed everything. Sandra had invited Michael's cousins and a few neighbors over, turning our house into her stage. She stood in the kitchen, directing me as though I were staff. "Set the table with the blue plates." "Not those. Those are tacky." "Oh, and don't bother with dessert. I already ordered something better." My jaw clenched so tightly it ached. But I obeyed silently, setting the table, watching her command the room like a queen in her castle. When the guests arrived, Sandra held court at the head of the table. She poured wine, laughed too loudly, and told stories about Michael's childhood, painting herself as the flawless mother who had done everything right. I sat quietly beside him, my fork untouched, listening. And then it happened. One of the neighbors asked how Emily was doing at school. Before I could answer, Sandra cut in. "Oh, she's thriving. She's practically mine, you know. I handle most of her routines now. Poor thing would be lost without me." The table erupted in polite laughter, but I felt my face flame. My hands shook under the tablecloth. Emily sat across from me, her wide eyes flicking nervously between us. Michael chuckled awkwardly and took a sip of wine. He didn't defend me. He didn't correct her. He let her claim my daughter in front of everyone. That night, After the guests left, I walked into the guest room, closed the door, and finally let my body shake. Tears spilled silently down my face, not just from anger, but from clarity. Sandra wasn't simply pushing boundaries, she was erasing me, piece by piece, in front of witnesses, with Michael's silent approval. But what she didn't know was that the more she tried to erase me, the sharper my resolve became. I wasn't powerless, not yet. I started small. I began reclaiming moments with Emily, gently but firmly. When Sandra announced plans for Emily's wardrobe, I asked Emily privately what she wanted, and together we chose outfits that made her smile. When Sandra signed her up for activities she hated, I volunteered at school, making sure teachers spoke to me first. Emily might not have understood the battle, but she felt my presence. She clung to me more at night, whispering, "Mommy, don't let anyone take me away." Her words were both heartbreaking and galvanizing. They reminded me why I couldn't stay silent forever. Sandra mistook my calm for weakness. She mistook my silence for surrender. She didn't realize every polite nod, every forced smile, every moment I appeared to step aside was a strategy. I was learning her patterns, waiting for the right moment to let her arrogance undo her. The storm wasn't coming anymore. It was already here. And soon, one way or another, something in this house was going to break. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning, one that began like any other. The air smelled of bacon and coffee drifting from the kitchen. Emily was still in pajamas, humming while she colored at the table. I was enjoying the quiet rhythm when Sandra swept in, heels clicking sharply against the floor, her phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, of course," she said into the receiver. "Emily can stay with me next weekend. I'll take her to the recital. Her mother doesn't need to worry about it." Her words hit me like ice water. She wasn't asking. She was informing. I set my coffee cup down slowly, the porcelain clinking against the saucer louder than I intended. Sandra ended the call, slipping her phone into her purse with a satisfied smile. "What recital?" I asked evenly, though my pulse hammered. Sandra waved a dismissive hand. "The piano recital. I enrolled Emily in lessons. She's a natural. Didn't Michael tell you?" Emily's crayon froze mid-stroke. She looked up at me, eyes wide and uncertain. She hadn't said a word about piano because she hadn't wanted to do it. I knew it without asking. Michael walked in just then, car keys in hand, and froze at the tension thickening the air. Sandra turned to him smoothly. "I was just telling her about Emily's recital. Isn't it wonderful?" Michael shifted uncomfortably. "I thought it would be good for Emily to try." I stared at him, disbelief flooding me. Without asking me, without asking Emily, he ran a hand over his jaw, avoiding my gaze. I didn't want to fight. That was it. The dam broke. I stood, every muscle trembling but steadying with each word that came out of my mouth. "This is not about avoiding a fight, Michael. This is about respect, about boundaries, about our daughter having a say in her own life." Sandra's smile thinned, her eyes sharp as knives. "Boundaries?" she repeated with a laugh. "If it weren't for me, this house would fall apart. You should be grateful, not hostile." I turned to her fully, my voice low but firm. "Grateful? You took my bedroom, you rearranged my kitchen, you signed my child up for things she doesn't want, and all the while, you speak as if I don't exist." That isn't help, Sandra. That's control." The room went silent except for Emily's small, shaky voice. "Mommy, I don't want to play piano." That single sentence cracked the tension wide open. My daughter's honesty, her tiny courage, was the spark. Sandra's lips tightened. "She doesn't know what's good for her. I do. I raised a son, didn't I?" I felt something inside me harden into steel. I stepped closer, my voice steady, carrying every ounce of fire I'd been holding back for years. "You raised your son, yes. But Emily is my daughter, and I am her mother. This ends today." Michael finally looked at me, his expression torn, guilt etched in every line of his face. For once, he didn't laugh nervously. He didn't brush it aside. He stayed silent, watching, as if realizing the gravity of what was unfolding. I took Emily's hand gently, pulling her closer to me. "From now on," I said, my eyes locked on Sandra, "decisions about Emily go through me, not behind my back, not through whispers, through me." Sandra's face flushed crimson. She opened her mouth, ready to unleash another tirade, but I lifted a hand, stopping her cold. "You've crossed every line, Sandra. You moved into my room, claimed my space, tried to take my child, but you forgot one thing. You can't erase me. Not in this house. Not in Emily's life." The words hung heavy in the air, sharper than any scream could have been. Sandra glared at me, her breath quick and shallow, but she said nothing. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. Emily squeezed my hand, her small fingers clinging tightly. That single gesture told me everything. She saw me. She needed me. And no matter how loud Sandra tried to be, that bond could never be replaced. Michael finally stepped forward, his voice quiet but weighted. "Mom, maybe it's time you respected some boundaries." The look on Sandra's face, shock, betrayal, fury, was almost enough to make me falter. Almost, but I stood firm, my daughter's hand in mine, my spine straight, my voice calm. For years, I had been silent, playing the role of the accommodating daughter-in-law. But that morning, in my kitchen, in front of my husband and my daughter, I drew the line. Sandra could rage, she could glare, she could even plot her next move. But the balance had shifted. She knew it. Michael knew it. And I knew it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam a door. I didn't have to. My presence, my words, my resolve, they were enough. And for the first time in years, Sandra realized she wasn't the only force in this house. The silence that followed our confrontation felt heavier than shouting ever could. Sandra's face had hardened, her eyes sharp and unyielding, but she didn't speak. Michael stood between us, shoulders tense, as if he finally understood the weight of his choices. And Emily clung to my hand, her wide eyes locked on mine, silently pleading for reassurance. The rest of that day passed in a blur. Sandra retreated to the upstairs bedroom, my bedroom, without another word. Michael busied himself in the garage, avoiding the storm that had already broken. And I stayed close to Emily, coloring with her, listening to her chatter about dolphins and crayons, grounding myself in her innocence. But that night, when the house was quiet and Emily was asleep, Michael came into the guest room. He stood awkwardly by the door, as if he were a stranger in his own home. "You meant every word," he said finally. I looked at him steadily. "Every single one." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I've been trying to keep the peace, but maybe I've been protecting the wrong person." The admission was small, but it cracked something open. For the first time in years, Michael saw what I had been living with. And though he didn't say it outright, I could tell. He knew Sandra had gone too far. The next morning, Sandra avoided me. She fussed over Emily, packed her lunchbox, even kissed her on the forehead as though nothing had changed. But I noticed the way her hands trembled slightly, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She had felt the shift, too. For the next week, the house felt like neutral ground. Sandra moved more carefully. Her commands softened into suggestions, her comments quieter than before. She still lingered in spaces that weren't hers, but there was a hesitation now, a recognition that the balance of power had changed. Michael began to show small signs of support. When Sandra interrupted me at dinner, he redirected the conversation back to me. When she dismissed my opinion, he asked her to listen. They weren't grand gestures, but they were enough to remind me I wasn't standing alone anymore. And Emily, my sweet Emily, started to mirror my confidence. She asked me about her school projects first, sought me out when she was upset, and told me quietly one night, "Mommy, I like it when you talk strong." Her words lit something in me. I realized this fight was never just about a bedroom or a kitchen. It was about the example I was setting for my daughter. If I let Sandra erase me, I'd be teaching Emily that silence was the price of peace. But if I stood firm, I'd be teaching her that her voice, her choices, her space mattered. That realization became my anchor. One evening, as I tucked Emily into bed, Sandra appeared in the doorway. Her face was unreadable, her arms folded. She didn't criticize, didn't intrude. She just said softly, "Good night, Emily," and walked away. It wasn't an apology. Sandra wasn't the kind of woman to apologize, but it was the first time she had acknowledged my role without overshadowing it, and that, in its own way, was a victory. I know this isn't the end. Sandra will always test boundaries, always push for control, but I also know now that I can push back, calmly, firmly, without losing myself. The war she started will not define me. My daughter will not grow up watching her mother be erased. Instead, she'll see a woman who stood her ground. Looking back, I realize the lesson is simple, though it took me years to learn. Sometimes silence isn't peace, it's surrender. And the moment you decide to speak, even softly, everything changes. So if you've ever felt invisible in your own home, if you've ever felt someone trying to erase you, remember this: your presence matters, your voice matters, and you don't need to scream to be heard. You just need to stand firm. And now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to draw the line, even with family? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments. I'll be reading them. If this story spoke to you, don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Every click, every comment, every share helps us grow this community of voices that refuse to be silenced. Because in the end, we all deserve to be heard.